What happened to all the news? Also, new beard, who dis? I'm iCave Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and when there's no news to talk about, we answer your questions. Just a bit earlier in the show, we always answer your questions anyway, but that's what we're going to be doing today because there's not a huge amount of stuff going on in the news. Yeah, you can definitely tell the quiet news days because the feed of all of the big news sites, Mac Rumors, 9to5Mac, everyone like that, they're like, oh, you can save $50 on an M1 Mac, and that becomes the entire news cycle for a day. So we're just going to answer your questions. Let's get into it. Eliezer Aquino asks, iCave answers, do you think that Apple will buy LumaFusion because they advertise it so much and praise it for iPad? Might as well add it as a Pro app for iPad instead of Final Cut. Now, I don't think that this is what will happen because Apple already owns all of the stuff for Final Cut. They already have all of the stuff behind the scenes for it. They have all of the code. I don't think there's a huge issue with bringing it to the iPad. I just think they've been waiting until they've at least got a good chunk of the iPads that are out there that can run it effectively. Now, LumaFusion is great, but it is not Final Cut. There are definitely some massive differences in terms of the way that it works, in terms of animated titles and things like that. That's the sort of stuff that I always find is missing with LumaFusion. And one of the big things that Apple always does is whenever they release a piece of software for their iOS and iPadOS platforms as well as the Mac, there's always crossover where you can move your files in between, and all of those features will work on both platforms. So it doesn't mean that you need to be able to access every single feature on the iPad that you can access on the desktop, but if you move a file from the desktop to the iPad in order to do some quick changes, it all still needs to work. So it still needs to have all of those features in place, even if you don't have full access to edit them in detail. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. So I don't see it being bought out by Apple. I don't think they need to buy it in order to grab that technology. I don't think there's any technology to it that Apple doesn't already have access to or have the capability of putting in their own app if they wanted to. And the code base should be very similar now, but I do think we're going to get the Final Cut and Logic and Xcode and stuff like that coming to iPad eventually. Xcode is the one that's a little bit in limbo for me because they released the Swift Playgrounds where you can actually make apps now. But my thought with Xcode is that it's going to be Xcode Cloud, which they mentioned previously, and I wonder if they might do Final Cut Cloud. Next up, Bill Krueger. iCave answers, rather than creating a new M1X chip, why not multiplex the M1 chips for the performance boost in the lineup and coming Mac Pros? That's a very good question. If, and this is still a big if they are going to multiplex, I like that word for this, if they're going to multiplex M1Xs, why not just put more M1s into something rather than making the M1X and then putting more of those into it? Now, the big difference here is that a big chunk of the die for things like the M1 includes low performance cores, or like those efficiency cores, which are really not as useful on desktop devices. Now, they have put them into the base iMac, and I think when we actually see next year's M1, it might not have as many of those efficiency cores. I think they might move closer to what they've done with the M1X, or what we're expecting with the M1X, which is 2 and 8. Maybe we get 2 and 6. So 2 efficiency cores and 6 performance cores in the next generation in the M2, rather than it being exactly what we had before. Because it might just be that in actual practice, Apple has found that the efficiency cores, they just don't need as many of them as they expected, and they could use that space on the die for more performance cores. So we could get an 8 core again, but with a little bit more of a skew towards the performance cores that can just kick in when they're required. Now, it also depends on what the efficiency gains are in terms of the A15 cores compared to the A14 cores. I think the big reason that they wouldn't just put more M1s into something rather than M1Xs is that you would just have so many efficiency cores sitting there that really aren't adding a huge amount to the power of a high-end desktop, but still taking up a lot of that chip space, and you still have to make sure that you don't have errors in those parts of the chips which would reduce the yield. Joe asks, iCave answers, do you think that the new Sony WF-1000XM4s, hate the name, will beat the AirPod Pro 2? I've not heard what the WF-1000XM4s sound like because, I mean, they're out, but I'm not particularly a headphone nerd, and also I've definitely not heard what the AirPods Pro 2 will do, because they're also not out. So it's a very difficult, very, very difficult question to answer. However, there are a lot of things like quality of life improvements that you get with Apple devices that you won't get with the Sonys. So you will get things like, I think Apple is pretty much renowned for having the best transparency mode for their noise cancelling at this point. Everyone absolutely raved about the transparency and the noise cancelling on the AirPods Max. So I would think that Apple will bring a bit more of that expertise to the next generation of AirPods Pro 2. I think it's things like the automatic switching that you now don't get in those Beats Studio Buds, so that your AirPods are connected to everything within Apple's ecosystem. There's also things like the potential for AirPlay to come to these, which we've talked about in the past. Apple's lossless service at the moment isn't compatible with the AirPods, with any of the AirPods, even the Macs, even over a wire, because they use Bluetooth as their standard for sending the audio from your device to them. But apparently there is the capability, in hardware at least, for using AirPlay, which uses Wi-Fi to connect to them rather than using Bluetooth, which would absolutely open up the amount of bandwidth, the amount of throughput, the amount of data that can basically be pushed to these things would mean that lossless would work. So I think that's going to be another thing. But also with AirPods, I have a feeling that Apple is going to push some of their health sensors onto AirPods as well. So potentially, even if you went for a run without an Apple Watch, it might be able to keep track of your heartbeat, it might be able to keep track of your temperature, and also pedometer features, so it can tell how many steps that you've done, all that sort of stuff. Of course, if you've not got a watch on you, you're also going to be, not really listening to a lot on those AirPods. So that might not be my best prediction ever. But yeah, there's a lot more that comes with AirPods than other headphones in terms of the feature set that runs across iOS devices. Evan Rodgers asks, iCave answers, I'm looking to buy a used 2018 iPad Pro for a young family member. How long do you think this particular model will receive iPadOS updates going forward? 2024 or 2025? That's a tricky one because they've been out for quite some time already. I think 2024, 2025, both of those are reasonable estimates. Remember that the cores inside are A12 cores, even though it's an A12X in the 2018, that's right. So it has got a lot of power, but there will be features that will be missing. So regardless of how long it gets actual OS support, think about it, the iPhone SE, the original iPhone SE, I think is still getting support with iOS 15, but that's kind of in number only. If you look at the feature set that's coming to it, you're not getting all of the stuff that needs the neural engine, you're not getting a lot of the kind of flagship features will not be a part of it. Yes, it's getting the update, so it will be up to date in terms of security updates and patches and the quicker engine for Safari and the kind of new feel to things, but you're not going to be able to point the camera at text and highlight it with that phone, and that's the sort of thing that will start to disappear from the iPad Pro. So in terms of lifespan, it will survive until 24, 25. However, and it will be able to run the latest apps. It won't necessarily have every single feature built into the OS. So if there's interesting stuff that comes to it, like, for example, it won't have the LiDAR sensor in the front. And I think LiDAR is going to take a bit more of a front seat this year with the iPhones, and I think portrait mode video coming to pretty much anything with a LiDAR sensor on the back. So there's going to be some features missing, but 2024 or 2025, probably 2025, will be the last time it gets a major software update. Bruce Grubb asks, iCave answers, do you think the supposed upcoming Intel MacPro will actually be an Intel M/whatever hybrid? From a sales standpoint, it makes more sense to support those who still need Intel while also catering to those who want an M/whatever Mac Pro rather than an Intel one. From a cost-benefit standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to put out an Intel Mac Pro if a year later an M version is going to come out. I completely see what you're saying. It looks like the only reason they are putting out another Intel Mac Pro is mainly because there are people out there that need the Intel stuff for scientific stuff, for the ridiculous amount of memory that it supports. 1.5 terabytes is what you can spec out an Intel Mac Pro to in terms of RAM, which is just an obscene amount of RAM. I don't think even Linus Tech Tips managed to get theirs up to that level. I wonder if anyone's actually got one with 1.5 terabytes in it. If anyone, it's probably either iJustine or MKBHD. They've probably got 1.5 terabytes just because they can. But there are people out there that do still need an Intel one. I think it's a very poor choice in terms of the cost benefit, but as a lot of people have pointed out to me, the kind of people that need a 1.5 terabyte 28 core Mac Pro are probably people doing such insanely high-end work that the job that they need to buy it for will cover the cost of that device, and it will be basically written off as a tool that they need for a job. So this is going to be like movie studios. It's going to be, incredibly high-end 3D modeling, scientific applications, that kind of thing. Now, I would absolutely love for Apple to bring out a hybrid that has an Intel chip in there as well as an M-series processor. My concern is if you're going to put both of them in there, you're paying a huge amount of money to Intel for that. Then Apple's got to make their money as well on the system in general and the M-series chips. And how many M-series chips are you going to put in there? And how well are they going to communicate within the system? Are they going to actually have the ability to do this stuff? I mean, maybe they could literally put in a single M1X as well as the high-end Intel chips so that you get the features that you would be missing from an Intel Mac Pro in terms of the video background stuff, the text recognition, all of the other stuff that requires the M-series chips. But I just don't know how easily they can build something that communicates in that way within a single system. Would I love to see it? Yes. Do I think it will happen? Probably not. Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCave answers, I wonder when the old 27-inch iMac becomes non-orderable. So yeah, we saw the 21.5 inches get a lot of supply constraints, and they reduced the amount of SKUs available. We also saw the iMac Pro disappear from Apple's websites already, but I don't think we're going to see this disappear until the new 30+ inch version arrives with M1X inside, unless Apple is literally just running out of stock. I don't think Apple is wanting to buy any more processors, so it might just be how much have we got on the shelf. I'm not convinced that that Apple doesn't actually have the new iMac ready, and they might purely be waiting for some of that stock to run down before they move over to it, which is I'm almost certain what happened with the Apple TV. The 4K refresh that they just did with A12 inside instead of A10X, the performance is basically identical. The graphics are slightly poorer on the new one, but I think they were literally just running down the stock and waiting for the nearest event to that before they actually announced it and went, now this is what you get inside. Because I don't think it was an upgrade in order to improve performance. I bought mine when it came out, mainly because I wanted the remote and I needed a 4K box because I only had a 1080p one before. But in terms of the iMacs, I don't think they're going to cancel it before the new iMac becomes available. They might just dump everything they've got left in terms of 27-inch Intel iMacs into their refurbished program as a bit of a way of discounting them. But yeah, I don't expect to see them disappearing off of the website before the larger iMac arrives. Also from Marcin Kowalczyk, do you think that the white bezels are here to stay on the entire lineup? I don't think they're going away, but I don't think that they are going to be across all of the Pro models as well. I do think that we are going to get our Pro Macs with the black bezels, because black basically fades into a studio like mine better, which is why TVs tend to have black bezels, because you tend to have them on a darker wall, whereas the iMac is designed to be kind of used anywhere in the house, kind of as a bit of a feature, so the white bezels actually disappear better into lighter backgrounds, which you tend to have in a lounge or a kitchen or a bedroom. You don't tend to have black walls, whereas if you've got a more professional environment, and an office maybe that you've designed specifically to work with video editing or photography, you don't have a huge amount of extra lighting. Like my room in here actually sits very, very dark when I'm not filming. I just put the lights on specifically for filming, and sometimes they are light enough for you to actually see what I look like. Other times I get it wrong. But having those dark bezels in a studio setting does mean that the edges of the iMac disappear there. Having the white bezels, or just off-white, kind of light grey bezels in a normal household environment, will also make it disappear more into the background when it's in use. So I think Linus Tech Tips were even saying that it kind of looks like the display is floating because of those white bezels, which is actually a nice thing. So I think, yeah, expect white on consumer and black on Pro models. That seems to make sense to me. But who knows, they might just put white on everything, and you just got to deal with it. And if they do, dbrand will do a good business in making surrounds for stuff. Cool, so that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for your questions. If you've got a question for me, hashtag #IGaveAnswers down in the comments section with your question. And as long as it makes sense and it's going to have an interesting answer for the community, it will get answered. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.